The Straits is basically the equivalent of an economic nuclear weapon that they're trying to use against the world. And they're bragging about it. They're putting up billboards in Tehran bragging about how they can hold 25% or 20% of the world's energy hostage. Imagine if those same people had access to a nuclear weapon. They would hold the whole region hostage.
So in case anyone forgot, the U.S. naval blockade of the Strait of Hormuz is still in effect. And as a result, the energy situation is continually getting better for America and much worse for Iran. In fact, you could kind of say that Iran is already unraveling as we speak. Because as we warned you 2 weeks ago, within 2 weeks of a U.S. naval blockade, Iran would start to run out of storage capacity for their oil and have to begin shutting down their energy production altogether. Well, that day is now here. We already have Iranian politicians beginning to warn their people of electricity rationing that could come. And needless to say, it's not a good position to be in. Iran would have been a lot smarter to have taken the deal that seemed like it was coming about 2 weeks ago. But as you may remember, the IRGC decided to do its little coup. And while it may have bought Iran some time, I'm not exactly sure what it actually achieved. It seems like it's just causing more financial and economic damage to their own country. But still, in the end, if you're looking for reasons why, after all the grandstanding and showboating, the Iranians make a deal in the end, I think this could be a major reason right here. Do you want to economically and politically collapse or not? Because that is basically the deal on the table for you. Sign the deal, don't get overthrown by your own people, don't face total economic catastrophe, or face all of those things. Like, do you want to stay in power or not? But folks, the story doesn't even end there. Because today, likewise, as it pertains specifically to energy, and keep in mind, energy in the Strait of Hormuz negotiations is absolutely leverage, America likewise just scored a major victory on the geopolitical chessboard after the United Arab Emirates, a Gulf state, announced that they would be leaving OPEC. Now, we'll explain what that means, but basically, it means lower gas prices. It means a relief of the energy shock that obviously America's facing, and Iran's trying to kind of use against us as leverage. Not only does it take that away from them, but I'd argue even long-term as it pertains to our just entire 21st century energy picture. OPEC starting to fall apart, that oil cartel that's keeping gas prices high is huge. And by the way, this is something that Trump really wanted to happen years ago. And almost incidentally, as a result of this conflict, that's sort of another chess move he has scored now for the United States. We'll explain all of it. Latest Iran updates as of this week, what's happening, what's important. First, though, do us a favor. If you enjoy our content, make sure you hit that like button down below. Subscribe to the channel if you are new. That's the best way to support our work, and it also ensures that you can stay up to date with all of the latest news and coverage. And as Trump is confirming, and as the math just simply says, yes, shut-off day is already basically here in Iran, and the results are going to be noticeable very soon. If Iran doesn't make a deal, maybe they'll already be noticeable regardless. Take a listen.
But what you're referring to is that when you have lines of vast amounts of oil pouring through your system, if for any reason that line is closed because you can't continue to put it into containers or ships, which has happened to them, they have no ships because of the blockade. What happens is that line explodes from within, both mechanically and in the earth. Something happens where it just explodes, and they say they only have about 3 days left before that happens. And when it explodes, you can never, regardless, you can never rebuild it the way it was. In other words, it will always be, if you rebuild it, it's hard to rebuild it all, but it would only be about 50% of what it is right now. So it's a very powerful thing that takes place, sort of having to do with nature. But when that gets clogged at the end, in other words, when you have to turn it off because you have no place to store this oil, either put it on ships or storage tanks, which they are just about finished with, a very bad thing is going to happen.
Yeah, so you just heard Trump explain things in a very Trumpian way, but what he's saying is completely correct. Without a way to get rid of their oil, which means exporting it, Iran is now running out of storage capacity. And at that point, either they're going to have to shut down oil production altogether, or as he explains in a colorful way, basically the pipes are going to start overflowing and exploding, right? You're not really left with much of a choice. You have to turn off your oil production as a result of the blockade. And while maybe in the short term you can just send that domestically throughout the country, obviously, if you're no longer able to produce oil under a blockade, the inevitable result is what? Your country is going to face energy shortages. It doesn't matter how much oil you have in the ground. If you no longer have the storage capacity to actually pump it out of the ground, then the inevitable consequence is indeed what comes next. And that is exactly why today, Scott Bessent said the following: while the surviving IRGC leaders are trapped like drowning rats in a sewage pipe, Iran's creaking oil industry is starting to shut in production, right? Shut down thanks to the US blockade. Pumping will indeed soon collapse, and gasoline shortages in Iran, as well as energy, electricity, things like that, are starting to come next. And if you think this is just a US talking point, I'd point out again, it's not. It's like math, it's infrastructure. That's just how these things work. You may think to yourself, well, oh, shouldn't it be simple enough to send that back to the citizens or just burn all the oil domestically? Again, it's just not that simple, right? It's a lot more complicated than that. And by the way, once you turn off oil production altogether, it's not easy as just flipping a switch that, immediately within 2 seconds, you're producing the same amount of oil again. These things are obviously a little bit more complex than that. But this weekend, we even had the Iranian president himself basically hinting to the citizens. They're not demanding it yet because the day is basically starting this week, but already sort of floating the idea out there that they now want their citizens to start rationing the amount of electricity they use. So if you think the effect that this blockade is causing is simply U.S. rhetoric, we're going to repeat it's not. Take a listen to the words of the Iranian president. We have a simple request from our dear people who are ready and on the scene now to reduce their consumption of electricity and energy. Oh, wait a minute. Right now, we don't need the sacrifices of these loved ones, but we do need to control our consumption. What's wrong with turning on 2 lights at home instead of 10? These are destroying our infrastructure. They're placing us under siege. How can we stand against it? That we don't allow the areas that they think cause dissatisfaction among the people to arise at all. Right? So it's worth noting that even the Iranian government's not being all that quiet about it. They're even preparing their citizens for what's about to come. Now, if it's that bad of a situation, you may ask yourself, then why don't the Iranians make a deal? Well, let's not forget, they were going to make a deal. The IRGC then stepped in. But this week, maybe that's the reason why, despite claiming they're not negotiating at all, right? We're not going to talk to America until the naval blockade is broken. They quietly did present Pakistani mediators with a new proposal that basically says, we'll negotiate with America on the Strait of Hormuz and then postpone nuclear negotiations for a later date. Now, understandably, this is not something that Trump was ever going to accept because he wants nuclear to be a part of the peace deal. But Iran is basically just trying to say, okay, please let go of the blockade. Let's figure out the Strait of Hormuz and just be done with that aspect of that. But why is that? It's fundamentally coming from a position, yes, of desperation because of the very rhetoric you heard there, both from Iranian and U.S. government officials. That's why this is happening. Trump, for the right reasons, understanding he has the leverage, has wisely rejected this proposal because, if, you lift the blockade and then come to nuclear negotiations, Iran's just going to come back with the same grandstanding filibustering behavior. As we've been saying, the blockade is the only thing that flips the timetable against Iran. Usually Iran just tries to run out the clock of whoever is currently the president of America. Now with the blockade, it's us who can run out the clock on them and basically say, okay, well, either collapse or make a deal with us right now. Likewise, President Trump over the weekend said he would not be sending the U.S. envoy to Pakistan anymore because basically, we're not going to fly all the way halfway across the world to waste our time. Wait, and we'll figure out when you're actually serious. He also likewise just put out today saying, quote, Iran has just informed us that they are in a state of collapse, which is referring to the energy collapse. What happens when you don't have energy? Well, society collapses, economy collapses, and the political structure is not far behind. As I said, there's basically 2 inevitable outcomes for Iran. Either they make a deal or we wait this out and the government collapses, because that's what's going to happen, under the blockade. They want us to do open the Hormuz Strait as soon as possible, which the prior headline had noted at. as they try to figure out their leadership situation, which I believe they will be able to do. Thank you for your attention to this matter, although Trump, again, has noted he will not be opening the strait. He will be continuing the blockade until nuclear negotiations and a serious leadership structure, who's actually in charge of Iran, are figured out and presented to us. So that is the position that Iran is in. They're increasingly getting weaker. Now let's talk about this OPEC situation, because now, on the flip side, the geopolitical leverage for America, and even long-term, just good things for consumers, is getting stronger for America, because today, the United Arab Emirates, let's not forget, this is one of the Gulf monarchies, but of the Gulf states, I guess you could probably say they've been the strongest and most vehement U.S. ally against Iran of this thus far. The Gulf states have been with us, but, UAE's been the most outspoken about it. Well, today, they announced a major move saying that they will withdraw from OPEC after more than 50 years. Now, this requires some explanation. So, first of all, what is OPEC? OPEC stands for the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, and it notably, first of all, does not include the United States. America is not part of OPEC, but it does include countries like Algeria, Congo, Equatorial Guinea, Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, Libya, Nigeria, Saudi Arabia, and Venezuela. So the first thing you notice is, this common theme. It's a lot of the petro-states, right? Sort of these corrupt autocrat countries. Many, not all, but many of them are historically hostile or adversarial to the United States. But what's important to understand about OPEC is that they are basically a cartel. So these countries collectively control about 40% of the world's total oil supply, and as a result of it, as you could imagine, basically control the global price of oil. And what's been going on for many years is that you would think, okay, all these countries want to produce as much oil as possible and then sell that and make the profit. But no, actually, because again, they operate like a cartel, almost a monopoly, you could imagine to yourself. They've actually been putting quotas and limits on the amount of oil that can be produced. Why is that? Because they're basically trying to keep the prices high so they can sell at a higher price and then limit the amount of oil that they actually have to produce. So think about, it's almost like this big cartel price control situation on oil. A big reason, by the way, let's not forget that oil and gas prices got so expensive under Biden was, yes, partially because of Russia, Ukraine, but the flip side of that was actually because in response to that war, the OPEC countries like Saudi Arabia, keep in mind, Iran is a part of it, right? But others, Venezuela, etc., they basically got together and collectively started raising the price of oil, knowing that, by the way, the supply and demand pressure, the Russia sanctions, they would be able to get away with it. A big reason why gas under Trump in his first year prior to Epic Fury got a lot cheaper was not just because of drill, baby, drill. That's an important component. But you may also remember early in his presidency, he took that big trip to the Middle East, the very one a lot of people were criticizing him for not being America first or selling out to Qatar or something. It was never true. What he was there to do was convince OPEC to lower oil prices and start producing more oil, basically drill, baby, drill over there. And as a result, that's what happened. Okay, so this is OPEC, just so you understand. Now, for that very reason, as you could expect, Trump has been historically very critical of OPEC. Why? Because Trump wants cheap gas prices in America, so he obviously is going to take a problem with this effectively cartel of largely anti-American countries who are effectively price gouging, monopolizing, and artificially keeping oil and gas prices high. As a matter of fact, here was what Trump had to say in his first term. Yes, it goes back this far as it pertains to OPEC. Take a listen.
The United States stands ready to export our abundant, affordable supply of oil, clean coal, and natural gas. OPEC and OPEC nations are, as usual, ripping off the rest of the world. And I don't like it. Nobody should like it. We defend many of these nations for nothing, and then they take advantage of us by giving us high oil prices. Not good.
Well, imagine if Trump were president when he could come and see this. Oh, wait a minute, he is. But that's what's important to understand. I saw some Iran propagandists today trying to argue that this is bad for America. No, OPEC is bad for America. If OPEC collapses, if it falls apart, if countries leave OPEC in favor of helping the United States, that is a good thing. And that said, let's understand why and how and what exactly the UAE is doing today by announcing they're leaving OPEC, and again, leaving the regulations of this cartel that keeps on encouraging countries to produce less oil and sell them at inflated prices, coming at a time when you can clearly see what oil and gas prices are worldwide. Well, specifically, the UAE announced directly the very reason why they're making this decision to leave amidst the Iran conflict is to boost oil production without OPEC quota limits, a major shift that could impact and, yes, lower global oil prices. Because without the cartel, understanding there is a supply and demand and a need for it worldwide, UAE is basically saying, we're going to help out America and especially a lot of these Western countries by just producing as much oil as we can, right? The world needs oil. Why would we listen to OPEC? We're in a crisis right now. By the way, we don't want to help Iran because let's not forget Iran is also a part of this OPEC cartel. Screw that. We're just going to produce as much oil as we want. Huge win for the United States. And by the way, you'd have to imagine that if the UAE, the third largest power by my understanding, in the OPEC cartel leaves, they're not going to be the only one. A lot of these other Gulf states likewise are not happy with Iran. They've grown closer to America. So, expect that this might not be the end of it. Let's not forget, too, Venezuela, historically the Venezuela of Chavez and Maduro, was part of OPEC, is still part of OPEC. Will they still be a part of OPEC? This is something to watch. But again, you talk about the geopolitical chess. A lot of people ask, like, what's the calculus here? Why was Epic Fury a good move for America to make? You're sort of watching, this is another big reason for that. It's not just the fact that, as we've spoken about many times, the rest of the world is being forced to buy energy and thus become oil and gas dependent on America. It's also because the OPEC cartel is basically falling apart under the energy shock that's happening right now. So not only does OPEC, as we pointed out, right, control 40% of the oil supply in the world, they are a cartel. Yes, UAE is the third largest in OPEC, but take a look at this as well. They actually have the Fujairah pipeline, which, as you can see on this map, if you're looking at the screen, totally bypasses the Strait of Hormuz. So what this means is that the UAE already has had the infrastructure to figure out a way to get around the Strait of Hormuz altogether. They can produce more oil. It was simply OPEC rules that were stopping them from doing that. They're leaving. They're basically saying, all right, let's lower oil prices. Let's not keep this going forever. We're not going to be one of these countries that's price gouging the rest of the world effectively because of what's happening in Iran. As I said, needless to say, this is huge geopolitical news for America. It's huge even economic news because, sure, I'm not saying by any means gas prices look good right now, but when this is all over, they will go down again. But these are some factors that long term, right, if OPEC falls apart, you'll see cheaper gas like throughout the coming years than even potentially you saw before. So that's obviously very huge. And let's not forget too, if you even want to talk about Iran, again, Iran is part of OPEC. So even one country leaving, because there's only 12 countries in the organization altogether, the third largest country leaves. As a whole, that cartel is significantly weaker. The leverage they have to price gouge the rest of the world for oil then becomes significantly weaker. So not only is this a gain for America and huge geopolitical chess that we just won, Iran also just lost because, again, they are an OPEC country. They're a part of this cartel. This cartel just got weakened. So another thing to watch, but, you have to wonder too as well, by the way. Had Iran taken a deal sooner, had they not harassed the Strait of Hormuz, had they not basically pissed off UAE so much that UAE said, we're full Team America now, which is basically what happened. Because keep in mind, the Gulf states have historically had a nuanced, complicated relationship with America. Now they're growing pro-America, right? But you wonder if Iran had acted smarter, whether OPEC would still be standing today. But indeed, it is what it is at this point. And now the cartel is effectively falling apart. That's good news for us. It's bad news for them. What else can we say? Hey, Iran, you might be smart right now to make a deal. I'm just saying, it would make the most sense if you want to stay in power, if you want your country to remain functional and solvent. But, I'm not the one making these decisions. I don't even think the political leadership of Iran are the ones making the decisions. So it is what it is. But those are the latest updates, guys. Well, we'll keep you posted on this, but until then, make sure you hit that like button down below, subscribe to the channel if you are new, and until next time, God bless and peace.